Not every place with a cross on the wall is truly teaching the message of Jesus Christ. In today's world, some of the greatest spiritual confusion is happening inside buildings that look exactly like churches. They use the Bible, sing worship songs, and identify as Christian, but not everything is as it seems. Many people sitting there don't even realize that what they're being taught may not be the truth that leads to salvation. And these aren't just small or unknown groups. Some of them have millions of followers, global campuses, and music that is sung every single Sunday. In today's video, we're going to look at 7 well-known churches whose teachings have raised serious concerns, things every believer should be aware of. By the end of this video, you may start to see church names and reputations very differently. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which country you're watching from. You might be surprised how far these teachings have already spread. Let's get started. There's a denomination in the United States that was once built on a strong religious foundation. Its roots go back to those who sought religious freedom generations ago. At one time, it was considered a solid pillar of biblical teaching, but over the past few decades, it has gone through significant changes. The United Church of Christ has made several decisions that many believe differ from traditional Christian beliefs. These include supporting same-sex marriage, ordaining openly gay ministers, and promoting more progressive interpretations of theology. They still use the Bible, sing hymns, and practice church traditions, but critics argue that the message being presented is very different from the traditional gospel, a version that feels more inclusive but may avoid teachings that are challenging or uncomfortable. Romans 1:16 says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation." Some believe that when a message is adjusted to avoid offense completely, it can lose its original strength and meaning. What makes this denomination stand out is that it's not a small or fringe group. It's a well-established and historically respected institution with thousands of congregations. So when an organization of that size changes direction, it can influence many others as well. And that impact has already been seen across a wide range of churches. If this first example shows a gradual shift, the next one shows how quickly things can change. The Episcopal Church is one of the oldest and most well-known religious institutions in America. It has long been associated with presidents, national leaders, and cultural elites. Its architecture, traditions, and history are deeply impressive and well-preserved. However, critics say that certain doctrinal decisions have moved it away from traditional teachings. These include ordaining openly gay bishops, blessing same-sex unions, and allowing debates around core beliefs like the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15:17 says, "If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile." One of the biggest concerns raised is the gap between appearance and reality. People walk into beautiful cathedrals and hear ancient traditions, assuming they are experiencing historic Christianity. But according to critics, the actual teachings inside may be very different. In recent years, it has continued moving further in a progressive direction. But as concerning as gradual institutional change can be, the next group on our list is different, because many argue it was never rooted in Christianity at all, even though millions of people assume it is. This next example clearly reveals a broader pattern you'll start noticing throughout this video. Scientology doesn't strongly hide what it believes, yet it has still found ways to present itself as compatible with Christian communities. Founded in 1954 by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology is based on the idea that humans are immortal spiritual beings called thetans who are trapped in physical bodies. According to its teachings, these beings are burdened by past life experiences and trauma that must be removed through a structured and often costly process known as auditing. This belief system does not include a creator God in the biblical sense, nor the concept of sin requiring forgiveness, nor the belief in Jesus Christ's death and resurrection for salvation.
Despite this, Scientology has at times reached out to people from Christian backgrounds, with some supporters claiming it can fit alongside Christian faith. In John 8:32, Jesus says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Many critics point out that this kind of freedom is described very differently in traditional Christianity compared to alternative systems like this. What makes Scientology important in this discussion is not necessarily the number of Christians converting to it, but the strategy, presenting a completely different belief system using language that sounds familiar and acceptable. It often emphasizes personal growth, self-improvement, and spiritual freedom, while deeper teachings are introduced later. This pattern, starting with what sounds appealing and gradually revealing more complex ideas, is something that appears in more subtle ways in other groups as well. In that sense, Scientology represents a very visible example of something that can sometimes be much harder to detect elsewhere. And speaking of subtle approaches, the next church on our list is known for sounding almost identical to traditional Christianity while holding very different beliefs underneath. Among all the groups we're discussing, Unity may be one of the most difficult to recognize as different at first glance. Everything about it appears familiar. Unity churches display crosses. They read from the Bible, speak frequently about Jesus, sing worship songs, and create an atmosphere that feels warm and welcoming. The movement was founded in 1889 by Fillmore Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, and it presents itself as a positive and practical way to live a spiritual life. However, there are key beliefs that are not always immediately explained to newcomers. For example, Unity does not teach the idea of a personal God separate from human consciousness. It does not present Jesus as uniquely divine in the traditional sense, nor does it emphasize heaven and hell as literal realities. It also approaches the concept of sin very differently, often not viewing it as something that requires atonement.
In this framework, Jesus is seen more as a person who reached a higher level of awareness, something others can also achieve. But Acts 4:12 says, "Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved." Critics argue that this difference changes the role of Jesus from a savior to more of an inspirational figure. Another point often raised is how Unity appeals to people who may have had negative experiences with traditional religion. It presents itself as a more gentle and accepting alternative, which can be very attractive to those who feel hurt or disillusioned. And for many people carrying real emotional or spiritual wounds, that message can feel comforting. However, some believe that removing core elements like sin, accountability, and the exclusive role of Christ doesn't improve Christianity, but instead creates something entirely different while still using the same label. For them, this represents one of the most subtle and refined forms of spiritual confusion. If Unity is subtle in how it presents its beliefs, the next organization has followed a similar path for over a century, this time with a focus on health and healing that has raised serious concerns. Even its name sounds trustworthy at first. Two familiar words come together to form something that appears credible, yet many argue it conflicts with both traditional Christianity and basic science. Christian Science was founded in 1879 by Mary Baker Eddy. Its teachings suggest that physical matter, illness, and even death are not ultimately real, but rather illusions shaped by human perception. Followers are encouraged to rely on prayer and spiritual understanding instead of medical treatment. In practice, this has sometimes meant avoiding doctors or medicine based on the belief that illness itself is not truly real. There have been documented cases where this approach led to tragic outcomes, especially when treatable conditions were left unaddressed. In the Bible, healing is presented as a response to real physical suffering, not simply a change in perception. Another concern raised by critics is how the movement reinterprets biblical teachings while still using familiar Christian language. Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, is often treated as a central authority alongside the Bible. This introduces a pattern we've seen before, adding human interpretation in a way that can reshape the original message. While Christian Science is less visible today, The next name on our list is known worldwide. It's influential, widely recognized, and has shaped modern worship culture in a powerful way. Hillsong Church began in Australia in 1983 and quickly grew into a global movement. With campuses across continents, massive conferences, and a music catalog used in churches everywhere, its influence is undeniable. For many years, Hillsong was seen as a leading example of modern Christian worship. However, in recent years, a number of controversies have come to light. Reports involving leadership misconduct, financial concerns, and issues of accountability have raised serious questions. Some former leaders, including Brian Houston, stepped down following public allegations and investigations. From a theological perspective, Hillsong has often been associated with prosperity-focused teaching and a strong emphasis on emotional worship experiences. Critics argue that, at times, this focus may have overshadowed deeper biblical teaching. 2 Timothy 4:3 says, "The time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine." One of the most unique aspects of Hillsong is its music. Even people who have never attended a Hillsong service may still sing its songs regularly. The music is powerful, inspiring, and widely loved. But it also creates a connection between millions of listeners and the organization behind it. This raises an important question. How should people separate meaningful worship from the actions or beliefs of those who produce it? As significant as these controversies are, the final example on our list is something entirely different. It's not a traditional church with a building or membership. It's a modern, global influence. Some observers have described the influence of Oprah Winfrey as forming a kind of spiritual movement. Through television, books, interviews, and social media, her ideas have reached millions around the world. She often speaks about spirituality, personal growth, and faith, drawing from a variety of perspectives. However, some critics point out that her message blends elements from different belief systems in a way that differs from traditional Christianity. In various interviews, she has expressed the view that there are many paths to God and that spirituality is something deeply personal. This perspective resonates with many people, but also raises theological questions. John 14:6 says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." What makes this kind of influence powerful is how easily it reaches people. It often comes wrapped in messages of positivity, empowerment, and self-discovery. Because of this, many people absorb these ideas without fully examining how they compare to traditional beliefs. Across all the examples in this video, one common theme stands out. Not everything that appears spiritual or familiar is necessarily the same at its core. That's why it's important to stay informed, ask questions, and understand what is being taught. Because influence doesn't always come in obvious ways. It can be subtle, gradual, and widely accepted. Some of these organizations have global reach, large audiences, and strong cultural impact, and many people engage with them without realizing the differences in belief. The goal of this video is not just to point out differences, but to encourage awareness. So that you can think critically, explore deeply, and make informed decisions about your faith and understanding. Before you go, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. You might be surprised how global these influences have become.